Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Skip Hank. I'm the President and CEO of Explore International. And on behalf of Explore and Antenna House, I want to welcome you to today's broadcast of CSS or XSL-FO, which should I use for producing print publications? Our speaker today is Michael Miller, Vice President of Antenna House. Before we begin, I'd like to share a few tips with you. As an attendee, you should see an attendee control panel, which can be expanded or collapsed by clicking the plus or minus on the left side of each pane. You can use the question and answer feature to send text questions to me, and I will queue them up at the end of the presentation. You can also click the square to toggle the viewer window between full screen and window mode. As always, we are recording this webinar, and you'll receive a link to view along with a copy of the presentation in approximately 3 to 5 business days. I would like to note that all data and information provided in this webinar and expressed by the presenter is for informational purposes only. Explore International makes no representations as to accuracy, completeness, suitability, or validity of any information. Now, with all that said, you gotta love it, Mike.
I love the disclaimer.
Join me in welcoming Mike. Mike, the show's all yours.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to do this presentation, and judging by the number of attendees, it validates that there still is a lot of interest in producing paged output. So the presentation, CSS or XSL-FO, which should I use for producing my print and PDF documents? This is really in response to the question I get asked time and time again by people who are looking at CSS or XSL-FO. And Antenna House is actually the only vendor that offers both a CSS and an XSL-FO formatting engine. So that's why we get asked that question quite a bit. In this presentation, I'll provide you with information about both CSS and XSL-FO, and hopefully from that information, you'll be able to decide which standard best suits your requirements. I'll also provide you with some background information about the publishing environment, the challenges faced in formatting documents to produce print or PDF, and even why do we have the need for CSS and XSL-FO for producing pages. Certainly long before CSS and XSL-FO existed, there were other solutions for formatting pages. So the first question is this going to be a marketing talk? It's certainly not going to be a product marketing talk, but I am marketing the use of CSS and XSL-FO. I'm a very strong believer in standards. I've worked with systems in the past, I've sold software in the past that were not based on standards. And I've seen over the years those systems become antiquated, obsolete. The people using those systems had no way forward, and it meant reinventing the wheel and starting all over again with new up-to-date technology. CSS, XSL-FO, XML, structured content, these are all standards, and there definitely is a path forward, and it addresses current needs and future needs. So my hope is that I can sell you on the idea of using one of the two standards for doing your page formatting. The presentation itself will have a little technical detail, but very little. I'm not a technical person, so if I get into technology, I'm over my head. But hopefully this will be at a level that we all understand. So contrary to popular belief, page, print, paper are not dead. We see a big demand for that. We see a lot of demand for paged output. paged output PDF print still lives, and I would predict that there's a long future ahead for all those. We now have 2 recognized international standards to produce paged output. In the past, CSS was used to make web pages, and XSL FO was used primarily for print. As we go further into the presentation, I'll show how CSS has now evolved into being able to produce paged output and is very suitable for that purpose. Both CSS and XSL FO are built around structured content, and they're both from the W3C. By separating content from form, we can repurpose content and evolve it as required. Quite often, another key component of solutions is an integrated database. This truly enables you to capture the information once, store it once, and then manage it through all the iterations that it's disseminated in, also over the life of the project or the product. "25 years ago, we were really only interested in print. How do we produce that? Paper publication. We started to see the rise of PDF, then the rise of the internet, and today we're concerned not only with producing print publications, but also publications of the same information that we can deliver in PDF format to tablets, to e-readers, over the internet. But for the purpose of this presentation, we're really going to narrow the scope down to print paper. And our focus will be the page media in the form of PDFs and print. When building a solution, users are confronted with an alphabet soup of all the various forms of content, standards that you encounter. Some of those standards are international standards. Some of the standards are company standards. Others are industry. PDF is a good example. PDF originally started out as an Adobe developed standard. Adobe eventually made PDF open source, and finally ISO made PDF an international standard. So one thing that I think is pretty universal, other page descriptions have come and gone over the years, but PDF certainly seems to be the most popular one used. We'll focus on 3 areas when we talk about markup or standards: markup, page description, schemas, DTDs, the document type definitions. So in a markup language, it's a system for annotating a document or text in a way that distinguishes the markup from the text. The instructions expressed directly by the tags include typesetting and presentation markup, procedural markup, which is embedded in the text and instructs other applications how to produce the pages or the output that's required, and then descriptive markup, which separates the text from the presentation. XML, SGML, XHTML are all descriptive markups. Page description languages actually drive the printers or the rendering devices. Wikipedia lists 41 different page description languages, but the ones that we're most familiar with are PDF, PostScript, the HPGL, and some of the others such as AFP for some of the advanced function printers. In most of these solutions, you don't really get into the nuts and bolts, the page description languages, but what you do get involved with are the schemas, the document type definitions, or the data models. Some that are the most common ones. And this is where we're going to be taking content from these schemas and outputting them into PDF print page output. Some of the more common ones are the Darwin information typing architecture. This is used quite extensively for producing software documentation, product documentation, training documentation. With DITA, you actually divide the content into topics, and you manage the content by the topics. And then as you build your publications, you create a topic map that assembles all those topics into the final output. DITA has become very popular. There's a lot of resources out there to really jumpstart a DITA solution for a company, and we see that quite a bit. DocBook has been around for over 30 years and is used extensively for technical manuals. It also gets used for a lot of other things, and derivatives of DocBook get used for a lot of other things. It's very popular. S1000D is an international specification used by the military, the aerospace, for doing their documentation. And it's been really tailored for that purpose. JATS is for doing journals. A derivative of JATS, almost identical, is NISO for doing national standards. So they actually use the technology for doing the standards. And then TEI, Text Encoding Initiative, used heavily in the humanities, social sciences, linguistics. All these schemas, all these standards have been deployed. There's organizations that work extensively with them. There's a lot of resources available today if you want to implement a DITA, DocBook, a JATS, S1000D, TEI solution. Typesetting pages and documents is very complex. It's an art, it's a craft, it draws on hundreds of years of background and historically how pages are built. It's always been difficult to produce high quality print output from XML and SGML in a completely automated format. And in the past, doing this has really been the realm of very specialized typesetting tools. Some of you may be working with some of these tools yet today or are familiar with them. I was selling DataLogic's pager over 40 years ago, and there's still some of those solutions out there being used. All these tools required a very steep investment. There was a steep learning curve. We used to offer weeks of very specialized training. They had proprietary style sheet languages for their typesetting and typesetting codes. There was no interoperability at all between any of the systems because they were proprietary and they all had their own unique way of doing pages. They did them well, but again, they were proprietary. The one exception to the rule here is TeX. TeX was created by Don Knuth at Stanford University. It's open source and has been deployed quite heavily in academic environments. But again, if you go look at a TeX manual, it's cryptic in a lot of ways and nothing's easy about it. If you look at a printed publication, what we're trying to build in an automated manner, you have front matter, and typically in front matter, there'll be the title page, table of contents, list of figures, the body, which has chapters, paragraphs, tables, graphics, a lot of components that go in there. And then the back matter in the form of the index, appendices, and trying to automate producing all that from structured content, again, is a very complex, very challenging task. When you go further into the actual construction of a page, into the publication, you've got portrait landscape, left-right pages. You might have multiple page sizes in the same publication, 2-page spreads. If you're doing multilingual documents, then you could have multiple writing directions, not only on the page, but even within one line. Add to that headers, footers, multiple columns, changing columns, resorting items and lists for the index at the back of the publication, controlling widows, orphans, all very complex requirements. And you're trying to automate that. You need very powerful tools to do that. When we talk about the formatting capabilities of CSS and XSL-FO, we're supporting all this functionality today. So it's come a long way. The driving force is controlling costs. I'm not familiar with any publication team that's had their budgets increased. Almost all organizations are reducing budgets, and that applies to the publication teams that are putting together the documents. We also have the challenge today of producing multilingual documents in this global environment. A lot of customers produce multilingual documents in 15, 20 languages. If you get into some of the cell phones, some of the electronic companies, they're doing documents in 30, 50 languages. Working in the global community has really made this more complex. And this again is where DITA fits quite nicely, because by managing at the topic level, when you're translating the documents across all the different languages, if one topic changes, that's all you have to address in translation. You don't have to go through the whole publication again. We're also integrating multiple sources of documents. Authoring groups spread throughout the world, lots of different graphic formats. And then companies are using the information as a competitive advantage. These are all the driving forces. Standards and technology make putting together a solution possible. So how do you know that you need structured content, automated solutions? If your information is revised between production cycles, if you reuse it in different ways, I'm publishing a paper, I'm producing A4 publications for one area, I'm producing letter-size publications for another, I'm producing pocketbooks for yet another publication, I'm taking the information, I've got a technical manual and a user manual, a lot of common content, reusing information different ways, publishing in different formats, taking boilerplates. Skip's disclaimer at the start of the presentation. He uses the same disclaimer every time. Doesn't have to rewrite it for each presentation. It's a boilerplate. You're able to use it. And a lot of boilerplate is used across publications. If your publication has multiple authors, reviewers, multiple departments, local remote creation, distribution, all these are factors that help you determine that using structured content, using automated solutions is the right way to go. What you're trying to achieve is high quality output, a consistent look and feel, automated production, which certainly results in reduced costs, rapid dissemination, supporting the repurposing of content, single source publishing. These are all factors that really justify the business case. As I mentioned earlier, I've been selling systems for a lot of years, and a lot of these motivations we were presenting 25 years ago, and they haven't changed. The business case hasn't changed at all. The tools have gotten better. The solutions have gotten better. There's more options. But these are always the same business cases and the same issues. Today, with the availability of resources, you've got non-proprietary solutions, non-proprietary skills. They're much easier to deploy than they were a long time ago. So if we talk about when to use CSS or XSL-FO, you've got certain kinds of documents that really have a high need, lend themselves to using the kind of automation you can achieve with CSS or XSL-FO. Technical documentation, user manuals, training documents, all these kinds of documents, the layout, the style, they don't differ from version to version. Other ones, statements, invoices. One of the documents I'll share with you in a little bit is a train ticket. It's the same layout, same document that's been done now for over 10 years. Documents where CSS and XSL-FO really don't fit well are things like presentation, where each slide, each page might be different in layout. Newsletters, again, they're very visually designed, as are flyers, display ads. Typically, textbooks don't fit well in an automated system because there's a lot of graphical layout to the pages. Some publishers have tried to more standardize the layout of the textbooks of the books they produce to make them suitable for automation. But structured content data with structured layouts is very suitable. Content data with unstructured layouts really isn't suitable for applying the technologies that we're talking about. So in a traditional system in the past, we had CSS to go out to the web, and we had XSL-FO to go to print. These were two different methodologies, similar in a lot of respects, but they were different. They required two different sets of skills to produce print and to produce web. So let's start with XSL-FO. This is part of XSL that describes how structured information should be presented in page format. So the metaphor here is the printed page. You might present that printed page in PDF format, but it is paged output. If I were to compare FO to the traditional proprietary compositions of the past, today FO offers 95+% of what you were able to do with the composition formatting capabilities of the high-end systems. Antenna House has one of the more expensive FO engines, and our software on a server sells for $5,000. The proprietary systems in the past, I don't know what the current pricing is, was $50,000, $100,000, and more. So pricing has certainly come down. Functionality has gone way up. Some of the features not yet available with FO are very specialized. If you need to do loose leaf publications where you're just going into a publication, doing your changes, and now I'm producing a package of just the pages that change, something that's done with legal publications from time to time, depending on the kind of legal publication, done with some of the manuals that you'll see in an aircraft. Loose leaf normally is not supported by XSL FO. Some of the other things that you'll encounter, such as very fine journal production, it's been argued that FO doesn't produce quite the quality that some of the more traditional systems do. But as I say, FO today can do a lot that the old systems can do. It's 95% plus. In some cases, they can do even more. There's a lot of things when you get to multilingual that FO is actually stronger at. So for FO, you have a style sheet language where you take your XML, you transform that using a style sheet, and today there's style sheets readily available for DITA, JATS, DocBook, TEI, and several other of the document structures out there. Use XSLT to transform the XML into XSL FO. FO is then the instruction set that the rendering engines take and produce the paged output. At one of the conferences many years ago, they actually sent XML files and style sheets to several of the XSL FO's vendors. And we each produced output, PDF output, and then they compared. Not everybody got the same thing, but everybody got output. And you didn't have that with the proprietary systems of the past. So with XSLT, you can transform XML documents into FO. You can also sort lists within the documents, replace text, generate back of the book indexes. This is all done at the XSLT phase. Also, when you take XML, you can take, using XSLT, you can produce web pages from XML. Web pages out of XSL FO is not a capability, but XSLT, that transformation tool, can certainly produce web output. CSS does not use XSLT, but it can. If you look at the Safari books from O'Reilly, they use CSS and they use XSLT to do some of the transformation in those books. This is from the W3C, this drawing here, but it shows a typical data flow that if I'm taking the XML documents using CSS, I can go straight to presentation. If I have an XML document, again, if I have a CSS rendering engine, I go to the output. I can also use XSLT and XSL FO to go to the output. Or I can take the XML, go to XSLT to HTML for the web or CSS for the presentation. So there's different ways to do the data flow. So just to give you an idea, some of the documents that are formatted with XSL FO. It's used heavily aerospace defense. I would say every aircraft manufacturer uses XSL FO, and a lot of the defense suppliers use XSL FO. The auto industry is a very large user of XSL FO. Depending what model car you drive, that user manual in the glove compartment, there's a very strong possibility that that was produced using XSL FO. If you're in the United States, your tax publications are done with XSL FO. If you're in Canada, your parliamentary proceedings and other documents are done with XSL FO. So there's a lot of deployment of XSL FO, and I would speculate that every one of you has documents done with XSL FO. And again, here's just some actual examples of documents done with XSL FO. The BMW user manual. This is actually a train ticket that I purchased when I was over in Germany, and it's done with XSL FO. A Dell user's manual. All these are done with XSL FO. If you're interested in actual documents done with XSL FO, send me an email and I can send you a large collection of links to documents out on the web that you can download and look at, and they're all done with FO. The easiest way to determine the tool that was used to create a document, this is in PDF format, is to look at the properties of that document in the PDF reader, and it'll tell you what tool was used. And you can, from that tool, determine what technology was used. So if it was done with FO, it may say XEP or Antenna House. If it was done with InDesign, it'll say done with InDesign. Microsoft Word, there's a lot of tools that produce documents that get out on the web. If we look at some of the tools out there, there's probably about 20 FO engines currently available. The full-featured ones mainly are the Antenna House XSL formatter, RenderX XEP, and then the open source Apache FOP. And I give a lot of credit to the Apache FOP for introducing people to XSL FO. The fact that it was available right when FO became a standard or official recommendation got a lot of people interested in FO. And Apache FOP is actually used for a lot of applications today that are less demanding. If your application's more demanding, then you'll probably look at one of the commercial products such as Antenna House Formatter or RenderX. Other options for formatting content, FrameMaker and Design. These are not based on standards, they're not FO engines, but they do get used extensively. CSS was originally intended for web pages, but like a lot of other web presentations of information, people wanted also a printed format. I don't know about you, but I print a lot of what I look at on the web. I still like to see it in page or PDF or print output. And that certainly was the case with web content. So CSS for print eventually evolved, and CSS3 added the capability of generated content page media from web content. And that's where we get the layout functionality for print. So again, the CSS3 adds page media output and talks about the structure of content on the page. CSS3 is an acknowledgement that there's a need to address page formatting with web content. And we talk about cascading style sheets. There's 3 levels of style information possible. You have the default style. So if I start with my web content and produce paged output, the default style, if there's nothing else specified, will at least give me some output. You can have a separate style sheet that overrides the default styles. And then you can actually put style information in the document or the data. And that overrides the previous 2 styles. When you're looking at CSS3, this is an example of defining what size page, the margins on the page, so forth. If a browser encounters this in the data, it's going to ignore it. Same as if I have information in a file that isn't suitable for a page, blinking or something else. The engines that format that page, CSS3, is going to ignore it. But it can all be in one style sheet, and it's a language that's consistent with the rest of the style sheet. So if we just look at some of the functionality added with CSS3, you'll see it's a functionality that builds a page. Headers and footers, footnotes, hyphenation, things that we're not worried about when it comes to a web page, but certainly need to produce a paged output or a printed page. The color, CMYK, which you use in print, as opposed to RGB, which you use on the screen. And again, all the other information, page terminology, the model, building margins, page breaks, controlling widows and orphans. These are all aspects that were not available in CSS before the CSS3 implementation. So if we look at documents formatted with CSS, again, it's just a host of documents. A lot of software documentation today is done with CSS. This is one of the O'Reilly publications. User documentation, very similar to what you're doing with FO. The Gazette, this is the London Gazette here. And it's an official publication of the British government. It's actually been produced since 1665. And at one point in the production, and XSL FO has now been available for almost 20 years. At one point in the past 20 years, I'm not sure when that was, they actually started doing the Gazette using XSL FO. And then several years back, they went from FO to CSS. And there's 3 versions of the Gazette published every day, and it's all the official notices of the British government. So with CSS, I can now take my content and go both to web and print. And again, like with XSL FO, there's a lot of tools available. And all these tools have a certain level of interoperability for the content and the style sheets. So there's Antenna House CSS formatter. Really the granddaddy of the CSS formatting engines is Print XML. And then there's other CSS tools out there. These are just a few. But with both XSL, FO, and CSS, you can take your content and go out to formatted pages. So there is a choice now, and that is CSS or XSL FO. If you go back in history, when CSS and XSL were first being developed, there really was no interest in the web group to produce printed pages. So the FO group went ahead and developed the standard for doing that. Today, there's thousands of implementations based on XSL FO and a very large number based around CSS. As I mentioned, there's a lot of style sheets available. You have reasonable open source tools available, both for CSS and FO. But again, if we're looking at CSS, it's relatively new by comparison. It's not quite as powerful, not quite as developed as the XSL FO tools that have been out there for over 20 years now. But the awareness of CSS for page media output is definitely increasing, and a lot of users of FO are looking at CSS for future requirements. So, looking at the data sources, just HTML, you would use CSS to go to print. XSL FO has no tools for that. XML, you can go use either CSS or XSL FO. I say no for the transform language, but there's nothing that prevents you from using a transform language with CSS if you want to modify your data, create some automated content. The syntax, CSS or XML, depending which one you're using. So this is a spread produced with XSL FO. I've got multiple columns. I've got a table, one column table that spans over two columns. I've got some vertical writing. I've got footnotes. The same spread with CSS. Again, they have very similar capabilities today. FO, when you lay out a page, you have the body, you have regions. CSS also has the body. They have more regions for defining where information gets placed in the headers, footers, the side notes, the margins. If we look at a page master in FO, it's very straightforward, odd, even, so forth. So now, when we look at CSS and XSL FO, there's a lot of overlap in the capabilities of the two. A lot of the same people that were involved in developing XSL FO developed and we're involved in developing the CSS. Where the capabilities of the software don't meet all the requirements of formatting, extensions get added to the software. Extensions is a way of going beyond what the standard or the recommendation specifies. As I mentioned, there's thousands of implementations of XSL FO and formatting out there now using FO or CSS. Antenna House, as a developer of tools for that purpose, we get tremendous amount of feedback from our installed customers. Languages they need, functionality, a change bar, and how they might want to place a change bar in some unique manner. And that isn't necessarily supported by the official recommendation. Same with PDF. PDF has evolved over the years. And you get into the metadata, you get into a lot of the functionality. When XSL FO and CSS was developed, they weren't considering PDF and some of the output requirements. So to address those needs, you have the ability to add extensions. And in the case of Antenna House, any extension we add to either XSL FO or CSS will be prefaced with AXF or AH to show that it's an extension. And if another rendering engine is handed the same style sheet or the same file, it'll ignore the Antenna House extensions, but go ahead and process what it can. So here we have extensions that add crop marks to a printed page. So with extensions, you're able to extend the capability of the basic standard or the basic recommendation. And then the engine on top of that is what really enables all that to work and produce the final output. Taking the properties again, we have the Antenna House extensions. We'll have some extensions that enable features that are available in CSS, but not necessarily in FO, to be now available in FO. And likewise, features that are available in FO, but not necessarily available in CSS, now to be usable in CSS. So extensions are very valuable. It is the one place, though, where when you start using extensions, you don't have complete interoperability anymore. So Antenna House extensions won't work with FOP. They won't work with RenderX. But you may have comparable extensions in those tools, and then it's just a matter of changing the prefix or the extension property to get your output. So organizations, again, you've got the pressures, the actions they can take, the capabilities that are available, and then the enablers. And CSS and XSL-FO can be an important part of any solution that you're putting together. And again, I can't emphasize enough using standards, structured authoring, content management systems. Some systems can be done using flat files, but content management is very critical for a lot of the applications, especially technical documentation. So the benefits of the standards is that you've got the interoperability. Again, both for your current content and styles across the applications and print platforms, the ability to address today's needs and to address tomorrow's needs. You're not really stuck with one vendor. From time to time, we've seen our customers go to other solutions because those solutions address the one thing they needed to do that we didn't necessarily support, and vice versa. We've seen a lot of FOP users come to Antenna House because they needed the added features and functionality. So you've got that freedom from vendor. If you had one of the proprietary systems of old, you'd be starting all over again. If you look at the 747, the 747 has been in commercial service now for 50 years. And Boeing, the airlines, users of 747 still have to maintain all the documentation. A lot of that documentation has had to be recreated, rekeyed, recaptured to migrate from systems of old to systems that are current. Antenna House got its start doing that for word processing software. There were at one point a lot of different word processors. Now there's just a few out there. But moving files between one word processor and another was not a trivial task. With today's solutions, you've got multiple products, multiple vendors, a lot to choose from. You also can run them on almost any operating system in almost any environment. So these solutions work in the cloud, they work on virtual machines, they work standalone. And because they're easily integrated, again, you can select the authoring tool to meet your needs, or you can select multiple authoring tools if different authoring teams have different requirements. You do have true international standards across all the options. So again, standards, CSS, XSL-FO. And for a lot of documents, having structured content, you're able to completely automate the solution. And the benefits you get at the end of the day really justify the effort to get there. And the effort is a lot less than it used to be because there's the style sheets readily available that you can use for developing your specific application. So if I take a set of DITA style sheets, I can modify the typefaces, the point sizes, the page layouts to my requirements, but I don't have to start from ground zero to do all that. And this does result in significant cost savings. You're building on the experience of others. So with the XSL-FO, it's over 20 years old, can do very complex documents. More effort went into FO than CSS, and you can see that when you look at the recommendations from the W3C, that one's a little bit more complete than the other. And as I said, there's a lot of style sheets available. There's products that are available both commercially and open source. CSS3, I talk about it being new, but it's actually over 13 years old. And again, you have products that are both commercial and open source available. It's easier to learn, easier to maintain, and cheaper, but its simplicity means it has some limitations. So my recommendation, and what a lot of people look at, is using CSS or FO when you can. We also at times say use CSS when you can, use XSL-FO when you have to. but take advantage of the resources, the large community of users, build on the implementations that have already been made available. And again, this is available across all operating systems, the cloud, virtual machines. There's also hosted solutions out there today. So that concludes the presentation. Are there any questions?
Okay, Mike, I do have a few questions out there. The first one is, how is the design for documents done in your formatter?
The designs are handcrafted. There's no WYSIWYG or automated design tool. So someone has to sit there and handcraft a style sheet. And depending on the complexity of your document, that handcrafting can take an hour on the low end and a year and a half on the high end. It's just how long's a piece of string. There have been some WYSIWYG design tools, but they don't enable you to take advantage of the full breadth of the functionality. And the minute you have to go in beyond what the WYSIWYG design tool enables you to do, you're now compelled to continue handcrafting in the future because those handcrafted components of the style sheet aren't supported by the design tool. So that's always been the one shortcoming of implementing the systems is your handcrafting. You know, Antenna House in our desktop version has a GUI that makes it easy to see very quickly what will happen with your changes to the style sheet, but it's not interactive design.
Okay. Next question. If you're already using FO, is there a reason to switch to CSS? Are 100% of FO able to be done with CSS, facing pages, numbers, TOC, etc.?
If you're using XSL FO and it's doing your work, and you're not going any further than what you're doing, there's no reason to change. In all honesty, even with the old traditional systems that are proprietary, if you're getting the work out and you don't need to do anything else, then there's no cost justification to change for the sake of changing. If you're facing hardware obsolescence, some of the early systems had proprietary, not only did they have proprietary software, but they had purpose-built hardware to run that software on. You know, that might be a cause to change, or you're running your systems today on Linux and you're going to Windows and the application you're using isn't supported on Windows. But if FO is meeting your needs, then there's no rationale to change. In terms of, can CSS do everything that FO can do? It can do 90–95% of what FO can do. And again, it depends on your rendering engine. At Antenna House, if you go to our documentation that's on our website, we have tables that compare CSS and XSL-FO function to function. So you can see where CSS has functions that FO doesn't have, where FO has functions that CSS doesn't have, where extensions have been added to fill in the blanks. But there are blanks, and you just need to look at that. But all the basic and most of the complex layout criteria are addressed by both. And again, that's a feature of the solution software you're using as opposed to the recommendations.
Okay, I think you already answered this, but I might be wrong. If you already have an XSL FO solution working, is there any reason to look at CSS as an option?
Only if you need to repurpose it to the web and you want to have just one technology. The other thing is, and again, the rationale would be CSS is easier to learn. If you go to some of the presentations from O'Reilly, and they made the transition from FO to CSS, they said that it reduced their style sheet development time by about a third, and there were a lot more people that knew CSS as opposed to XSL FO. If somebody doesn't know FO, to learn FO, if you can design web pages, you can learn FO very quickly. It's not any more complex than web page design. But O'Reilly did claim there were significant time savings in developing the style sheets for their type publications.
Okay. Well, this is just a nice compliment, Mike. This one, Mike should consider recording audiobooks. You must have that soothing pace, relaxing tone. So
I appreciate that, and hopefully we can wake everybody up at the conclusion of this. But I do, certainly invite everyone or anyone who wants to send me email with questions. There's a lot of resources if you want to know more about CSS or FO. You can get out on the web. It's just thousands of pages of information. Or if you want, I'm happy to send you links. There's a lot of good information out there that people have made available.
Okay, I think we got time for one more. One of the frustrations in my career was handling online versus paper doc versus for service continuity or disaster recovery planning. What would you, hold on here. Would you recommend a CSS3 approach to documentation for this? Want me to read that again?
Yeah,
that's kind of choppy because there's a real little window on here, unfortunately. But want me to read it again, or did you get?
Yeah, please.
Okay. One of the frustrations in my career was handling online versus paper, doc versus for service continuity, or disaster recovery planning. Would you recommend a CSS3 approach to documentation for this?
If we're talking online, and we're going to all the different formats, CSS would certainly be a potentially good solution to get that paged output that you need. You really need to look a little deeper into how the information is stored and what exactly is going out on the page. But it's again, one of the things that makes all this nice is you can actually try it. You can put together quick prototypes of a CSS or an FO solution at zero investment. All the vendors, Antenna House, RenderX, Prints for the CSS side, again, Antenna House, and the other tools are available for trial periods, and they're typically pretty full featured. So you can build that prototype solution and test it and see what tool fits your needs. You don't have to make that major commitment right up front until you're confident that you've got the right solution. But for that question, I'd need to look at it like a workflow and understand a little bit more behind the scene. But CSS certainly could be a potential.
Yeah, there are a couple other inquiries on here that people would like to talk to you and so on. And we're running not way past, but 2:08, and to respect people's time. That's what Mike will get a report of everybody that registered and was part of the event, and all your questions will be on that report. Someone asked about getting in touch with Mike. Somebody asked another question, and when Mike gets that report, which he should have tomorrow, I'm sure he'll follow up on those. And of course, Mike always will call, Mike at tenanthouse.com. Send him an email. I've known Mike for a long time. He'll share his knowledge. He'll do whatever he can to help you. So,
all this works, but the phone number. We are currently telecommuting. No one's been to the office for quite a while. But by all means, do the email.
Send him an email. I'll guarantee he'll contact you. So
you bet.
Okay, well, there are a couple more questions, but like I say, we're kind of running out of time. Mike, do you have any closing thoughts that you'd like to share before we sign off?
Again, I appreciate everybody attending this webinar, and hopefully I've convinced you to use CSS or XSL-FO to do your publications in the future. And thank you, Chip, for hosting this.
Yeah, we always enjoy them. They're even though we disclaim all the information in the front of it, I still get a lot of it.
The boilerplate.
Okay, with that, this concludes today's webinar. Mike, thanks again for sharing today, and for Antenna House for sponsoring the event. I would like to remind people to go to the Explorer website often. You'll find updates on our programs, upcoming events, and many other resources that we have available. We'll be posting updates on our conference in September. We're still hoping to have the conference, but we are also putting together Plan B, fundamentally a great online experience. So head over there, www.explorer.org. And for that, I want to thank you all, and we'll now disconnect.